Hey everybody, this is Rybo at the bench doing another pocket knife review today on the CRKT Hammond Cruiser. I use the term pocket knife fairly liberally here because this knife is massive and probably not going to be an everyday carry, but nonetheless it is a folding knife, and so let's get into it. Alright, so first size comparison. Like I said, this is a very large knife, so we'll bring in the Hoffman Richter HR-15 Survivor Tactical whatever knife. You can see that the Cruiser is actually much longer than this knife. I'll also bring in the Kershaw Emerson CQC 4KXL. It's about the same lengthwise, but the width, the kind of beefiness is much different. So the Hammond Cruiser is going to be much thicker, partly due to the Zytel plastic handles. Partly due to the fact that this is a liner lock, and so we have liners on both sides, as opposed to the frame lock in the 4KXL here. But besides that, the blade styles are somewhat similar. But yeah, so these are the two other largest knives in my collection in terms of folding knives. And if you're not familiar with those, I will bring in the Rat 2, Ontario Rat 2, and the Kershaw Skyline, another flipper knife. And then, just because it's my only other cricket that I have, the Cricket Squid, which is obviously quite a bit smaller. Alright, so that's size comparison. It's pretty large, just to have the actual measurements. Let's do this with the old trusty Stanley. So it's right at 9 inches. Blade is right about 4, which means that this is going to be right over 5 inches. And if we look at the thickness here, we're looking at 3/4 of an inch. Yeah, about 3/4 of an inch. Alright, so let's talk price. This is a very inexpensive knife, less than $20 on Amazon and eBay where I looked. I think it's $25 on Blade HQ. And that's brand new in all different kinds of color combinations. Brand new, this knife ships with 2 pocket clips, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, so under 20 bucks, sometimes you can get a really good deal, way under 20 bucks. But yeah, this is definitely a budget knife. The weight on this knife is going to be kind of, a lot lighter than this. This is almost 10 ounces. We'll bring in the scale here in a second to get a little bit more of an exact weight. So ounces, we're looking at right around 6, give or take some, just due to picking up the scale a little bit. But for such a large knife, not too bad. Typically with something like the Kershaw Emersons, you're looking at around there. So it's not terrible, especially considering the fact that you've got full metal liners that are not milled out. Alright, so steel, again, just kind of doing our basic specs here. Steel, this is a budget steel. So apparently the CRKT Hammond Cruiser has a couple different kind of variations. The first one that I guess was made, maybe 10 years ago, was, I believe, an AUS 8 steel, and now they're making them with 8 CR14 MOV, which is just the Chinese budget steel. Not a huge difference between the two. I don't know which one I have. I would assume this is the newer Chinese version. There's no markings on the blade. You can see that it just says Hammond Cruiser there, and the model number, and then the CRKT logo. I guess model number down here and the patent number right there. So if anyone has an idea of how to tell the difference between the old and new styles, I'd love to hear it. Alright, so that's the kind of basic specs. Let's get into build quality. Alright, so first of all, the action lockup. So brief story, I bought this knife from someone. I think they were unhappy with it. It seemed like, I don't know, based on the kind of the action or the lockup when you open and close. And when I got it, it was very don't know the right word, gritty. It was just, I was kind of immediately disappointed, but it turns out that it was just assembled wrong. So someone took this knife apart to clean it, and then just didn't assemble the washers correctly. So this knife has this special kind of braking mechanism here. So it's this push-pull, and essentially what that does, and I'll hopefully have a disassembly video for this soon, but essentially what that does is this turns a folding knife into a fixed blade. So if you look down in there, I'm going to see if I can get this on camera. When I move this bar, you see that little metal piece that kind of moves there. Basically what that's doing is that's providing a brake for when I try to move this liner to disengage the knife. And essentially what that means is just that you know, when it's disengaged, I can move this liner over. When it is engaged, it prevents, you know, if there was significant force right here on the blade, it prevents it from pushing that liner over and collapsing the blade. It's a cool design feature. Under significant pressure, I don't think it would matter because the brake, you can see, is actually just a thin piece of metal, much thinner than the liner here. So I don't have a ton of faith in it, especially because it still does allow the liner to get pretty far over. So there's just a hair there that's preventing it from collapsing on the blade, and I don't have a ton of faith in that. But because of that, basically you have this extra metal disc inside here. I did take it apart yesterday, and what that means is that if you can't tell that there's a spacing difference between the right side and the left side, you need significant space on the right side here to prevent this disc in here from rubbing on the blade. And so you can see when I collapse this, the blade centering is actually pretty good. It does look like it's gotten a little bit off. But basically you need to have a lot more space over here than you do here. And so you have to be very careful to reassemble the washers how you're supposed to have them. So this knife does have bronze washers as well as kind of Teflon spacers. And so if you do that incorrectly and you put the washers on the wrong side of that disc, basically any time that you open or close this knife, it's gonna kind of rub against that metal, and it's gonna just create this very unsatisfying kind of gritty action, and that's what this guy had. And so you know, I just disassembled it, played around with it, reassembled it with the washers in the correct place, and kind of played around until I liked it, and that made all the difference in the world. I mean, this knife is now super smooth, so that's one kind of note of caution. Yeah, so the bronze washer is definitely a big plus for this knife. You know, a lot of times on Chinese knives, budget knives, especially under 30 bucks, you're going to get Teflon washers, plastic washers, and there's kind of a lot of different competing theories on what's the smoothest and whatnot. But typically my rule of thumb is metal on metal is better. So like some kind of metal, aka bronze, brass, is just a better lubricant, and it's going to be more, it's just going to hold up better. I mean, Teflon or plastic can be very slick, but is just going to tear down over time, and I trust brass much more, and that's just me. And I typically have had a lot better kind of experience when I have you know, replaced plastic washers with brass washers, but that's just me. You'll remember in the Cricut squid review, one of the things I said was that the plastic washers on here just make this knife just very like sticky, and it's not very smooth. This has both, but it relies on brass, and this thing is just it's very smooth, and so that's a big benefit. Cricut, in my opinion, often unfortunately falls into the trap of just kind of cutting a lot of corners and kind of producing things cheaply. See the squid review, but in this case they did not cut that corner and a couple others, and I think that's a really nice thing. Takedown, I've talked about. One thing that I think is really nice about this knife as well is that they've made this very takedown friendly. Now, I don't know Cricut's official company stance on takedown, but what they've done is they've made every piece of this knife that you need to take it down, well, almost every piece, a T9, Torx 9 screw. So here, you have the double screws on the back, and then you have even a thumb stud screw, which is a really nice touch in that you can remove the thumb stud. And then you have a T6 for the pocket clip. So the pocket clip does have to come off in order to remove this liner from the scale. But you don't have to do that to take the knife down. So you can take the knife almost completely down with just a single Torx driver, which is really, really nice. And so I applaud them for that as well. The knife is a little bit more complicated to take down and put back together just because of that locking brake, but it's really not too bad. All right. So again, build quality for the price, pretty good. I'll say there is a tad bit of blade play. It seems to be that's because there's not a locking bar back here, which I'm a little disappointed in. You'll see like on the Hoffman Richter, you've got one right there. And so it's just a little disappointing. Even on the Rat 2, you have a kind of spacer there that acts as the locking bar. Theirs is kind of built into the locking brake mechanism, and I can show that when I take it down. But it does seem like it's just not a perfectly straight fit there. And so you have the tiniest bit of blade play, which isn't terrible, but it just kind of makes it feel a little bit cheaper than it is. Overall, however, the build quality I'm fairly impressed with, especially at the price. For a $20 knife or less than $20 knife, you get 2 brass washers, you get this brake mechanism, you get 2 very nice handles that I'll talk about in a second. And you do get a budget steel, but you get something that's very easily taken down. And for under 20 bucks, this is a lot better than a lot of companies do, and a lot better than Cricut often does. And so, so in that respect, I applaud them. Very, very nicely done. All right, let's talk ergonomics. Ergonomics is really where this knife shines, and it better because it's really big. But a lot of other knives, see these two, just don't have the ergonomics that this guy does, and partially that's due to the thickness. But they've just really figured out this handle. I mean, this choil is just really deep, and it has spots for each of your other fingers, along with this kind of swell back here. And it's fantastic. I mean, this knife feels the best in my hands, almost of any knife that I own. Certainly better than this, and much better than this as well. I mean, this knife really fills out your hand, and that feels just fantastic. Reverse grip on this knife just feels just great, even though I've never had to use a reverse grip for anything. Apparently people care about it. But the ergonomics overall are just fantastic. The one hot spot I would say, and this kind of gets into a little bit of the fit and finish of this knife, which I'm disappointed in. You see how this brake is not flush with the jimping on this ramp here. What that means is, you have jimping on the flipper, the top of the flipper right here, which I don't really understand, because when you flip this knife open and you go to use this jimping, yeah, you can feel a little bit, but all you really feel is this right here, because it's proud of the surface. And so that means that you're always kind of engaging it or disengaging it without really meaning to, which is too bad, because that just kind of makes taking it down difficult when you've engaged that brake and you don't mean to. So that's a little frustrating to me. The scales, I really love the scales. This is their honeycomb pattern. I wish they would make more knives with this. These scales are kind of, I don't know, they're different than both the Skyline and the Rat. The Rat, I really dislike these scales. They're not really grippy. The Skylines are fairly grippy, but these are even more aggressive, and these are very, very aggressive, and so I think that's a good thing. And I think that's a good thing because the purpose of this knife to me is not a carry knife. It's more of like a camp knife or a toolbox knife, or one to keep in your car, and it's something that you want, if it gets dirty, if it gets muddy or whatever, to have a good grip on. And so they're very, very aggressive. but I think it works really well, and I wish Cricut would use this kind of honeycomb pattern on other knives, because I think it does work very well. Ergonomics, the other thing, ergonomics of carry. The pocket clip situation is a little odd to me. So you can see that this pocket clip ramps from left to right up. You'll notice if you turn it, it ramps from left to right down. Yeah, that means you need two different pocket clips, and supposedly it comes with both of them if you buy it new. I did not buy it new, and he only had this, which means I can't actually carry this knife how I want to, which is tip up right side, so that when I reach in my pocket I can, you know, flip this knife open. I need the other pocket clip, so I'm waiting to hear from Cricut to see if they can send me a new one, but until then I'm kind of stuck. Again, for me, this is not a big deal at all because I'm not carrying this knife. This knife is really probably going to go without a pocket clip just to make it a little bit thinner, but for other people it might be you know, a pretty big issue. All right, so ergonomics overall really great. Field of use, I've talked about this a little bit. I think this knife is more of a camp knife, more of a toolbox knife kind of thing than it is an actual carry knife, but I think it fits that really well. This is your kind of budget knife that you don't mind beating on. It's really strong. You can basically turn it into a fixed blade and beat on it. You can take it down and clean it pretty easily, and it works really well for that. It would be great with gloves on. It's going to be fine if it gets dirty because that's such an aggressive grip. So that works very nicely. Improvement. So, well, actually, before improvements, let's talk about one thing, and that is the fit and finish. So where I said the ergonomics is really where this shines, and just the overall kind of budget nature and what they squeezed into 20 bucks, the fit and finish is definitely where you see that $20 taken out. And honestly, I'm totally fine with that. If you're going to skimp on something, give me the important stuff like the brass washers and whatnot, and skimp on the fit and finish. But you can actually see it just sitting here. The scales and the liners are not flush. You can see that particularly kind of where you have these finger swells. If I can get this in focus, there you go. You can see that these just don't actually line up at all. You can see them on this front one here, but also in the back you can see kind of the grip coming up before the liner does. And overall it's just kind of underwhelming. You can definitely see it there. It's just not flush all the way around. Like I said, the break isn't flush. And so you can see like little cuts like that in a lot of places on this knife. And you know, it does say cheap, but it also says, you know, we skimped on the right things. I would much rather have a little misalignment like that and have a smoother blade. Overall, the action on this knife, you know, this is not going to be a great flipper. You cannot easily sit here and flip this open, although it kind of is looking like I am. But this knife is super smooth. I wouldn't say the action is you know, comparable to the Skyline, although the Skyline's smaller, so you don't have to use as much force. But the heavy blade on this does make it nice and kind of gives it a soft close, which I think is really nice. But the action is not terrible. I'm okay with that. It's not a carry knife. It's super smooth, although you probably are going to have to use a little wrist to kind of flick it out, which is, you know, that's fine with me. All right, so improvements. What would I improve? Honestly, for under 20 bucks, I think they've done a really nice job with what they can do here. A couple things that I would improve, I guess. I don't get this whole like putting holes in the G10 or in the the Zytel handles. It's Cricut's way of, I guess, making the knife lighter. The M16 has holes all the way down through it, but all I see is every Cricut that I come in contact with that's been carried or used is basically just super dirty inside, because this just gets a lot of dirt inside. It also means you can't carry you know, a lanyard on here. You have to actually run it through this backspacer. Just kind of weird. I don't really need a skeleton knife unless you're actually going to go full skeleton like the Gerber Paraframe line. And so to me that's just kind of weird, but not a huge deal. The other thing, I would just improve this lockup. I don't like the blade play right there, you know, and maybe the pocket clip. I mean, all you'd have to do really is change this top design to put a screw coming down, and you could have this fully ambidextrous. Although I will say it's great that they've allowed you to carry this tip up, tip down, left or right hand. I mean, you can put this pocket clip anywhere, assuming you have the second one, which is nice. So overall, I'm going to say there's not a ton they can improve on this that wouldn't improve, that would not increase the price for under $20. This is, you're looking at a lot more knife than you would get with, some other budget options. So cutter carry, I mean, obviously I'm not carrying this knife, but, this is definitely a keeper for me. This is going to probably go in my car, go in my toolbox, but it's a really good knife. I've enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I did. It's really smooth, which I like, and it's just kind of a cool knife. It's really large, but I like it. This is probably my favorite knife that I've had from Cricut, because I just think it's a little bit more functional than some of the things they've given me before. So yeah, overall, I'm fairly impressed for the price point. And so if you're not looking for an everyday carry, but you need something that's a little bit larger, you're going to be using to, baton firewood or something like that, this is a great option, in my opinion. And hopefully Cricut can come through with the other pocket clip for me, and in which case this would be just phenomenal, especially for the price that I paid. So I hope you enjoyed this review. Hopefully I will have a disassembly soon. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.